Welcome, everyone. Today's theme is Think the Opposite. And I wanted to start off with a quote from Louise Gluck, who was just awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature because she has a quote that is so perfect for this theme. And it is, "The master said you must write what you see, but what I see does not move me. And the master answered, change what you see." So that's perfect for our theme of Think the Opposite or Stay on the Train, which I will explain a bit later. But first I thought we'll review what we've gone over in the past 4 sessions on balance. So first we looked at the meaning of balance, a non-judging attitude, simply watching whatever comes up. We said it's not a flat place, there's no dispassion or removal or apathy. It's only through acknowledging what we're experiencing and what's happening to us that we can change it. And I quoted James Baldwin, who said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it is faced." And what I thought was even more interesting was Chris Rock quoted that exact same phrase in his soliloquy or his monologue in Saturday Night Live's episode last week. So we're thinking alike. We also talked in that session about the benefits of balance, meaning that it creates a space between the feeling and the reaction. So in order to respond appropriately rather than our sort of automatic reaction, it gives us a feeling of control, because so often when we're in that agitated state, we're operating out of a sense of fear, and that really is a lack of control. And so this space that we create that can calm the fear, and it allows insight and allows us to move forward without regret. In the second class, we talked about understanding the need for opposites, which we'll explore more today, but highlighting how we wouldn't know one thing without the other. We wouldn't know joy without sorrow. We wouldn't know bravery without fear. We wouldn't know courage without vulnerability, and we wouldn't know light without dark. So we also discussed how we can become immune to our experience. Our happiness might be something we take for granted until it's taken away from us. And I believe that we are living through times of deprivation right now. Our normal rhythms have been taken away from us, our associations with family and friends, and our normal behavior of going to restaurants and concerts and things like that. So these have been taken away. And the thing is, it's caused 2 things. 1, we know how precious they are now. And 2, we have learned that we are quite resilient, because back in March, when these things were put into place, I don't think we ever thought we could survive or even thrive as we have for these last 6 months, and yet we have. So we're way more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And it wasn't that we didn't get sad or miss the old times, but we acknowledged those feelings without getting stuck in them. And we may have even realized that the ebb and flow, that undulation of life, the having and the not having, those opposites are actually gifts. So in the 3rd week, we looked at known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And exploring the unknown unknowns of who you are creates this wonderful space, because there you're letting go of judgments and filters and biases, which can close you off to new possibilities. Eckhart Tolle says, true presence always entails a tremble of uncertainty. It puts us in touch with vulnerability. And I also quoted Brené Brown, who said, vulnerability is our greatest measure of courage. So with our practice, we can learn to be courageous, to go into the unknown, and embrace it, become familiar with it, maybe even turn it into a known. And then last week we investigated beginner's mind, how it could be defined as a breath of fresh air, or as Picasso said, we can become young again. And I mentioned the tools that we can use to cultivate that. Discard fear of failure, have patience, ask questions, don't look just for answers. Listen without speaking and live by the words, I can. So now we're ready to go further. We're going to examine what we feel and think, and then see if we can change it. Maybe even think the opposite. I'm not talking about things like changing political affiliations, but we may dive into a bit of politics in a bit, but about things that bring us down, things we're afraid of, we feel guilty of, the dark stuff. And we don't have to dive right into the deep end tonight. I'm just opening the door, let's say just pulling back the curtain, allowing us to possibly take a look in there, see what's there. So one of my teachers, Diana Winston of UCLA, she just had an article in the LA Times, which actually Michael sent me, and she offers the advice that when things get too stressful, if you feel like you're on an emotional train, that it's okay to get off. And although in general, I agree, if it's too much to stay on the train, then yes, get off. But sometimes it's good, it's better to stay on the train and take it all the way to the end. Most of the time, what we fear most doesn't come true. As a project manager, I often had to take that train to the end and explore the worst case scenario. And in doing so, I was able to either discount that as an impossibility or it wouldn't happen, or put measures into place in order to mitigate that risk. It was absolutely essential in my job to go all the way and explore that. So I understand that it can be difficult, but we can do the same thing with our lives. I'm not saying it's easy. That's why I've saved this for the last class. But facing our fears, exploring our vulnerability, and cultivating the courage to face it, it's what these talks have all been about. And actually, we're already doing this with protecting ourselves from the pandemic. We've taken the precautions because Dr. Fauci and others looked into the worst case scenario and shut down the economy, told us to wear masks and stay 6 feet apart. And that was precisely in order to avoid more people dying. And these precautions were devised not because Fauci got off the train, but because he looked at what could happen in the worst case scenario. And he took the train to the last stop. So we accepted his recommendations because we too understood what can happen. In this case, we were actually told what to do. But what I'm offering to explore is scenarios in ourselves that no one's telling us we have to do there. We have to go there. We have to do it. So, okay, now we can talk politics for a minute, especially after the debate, the vice presidential debate last night. We didn't know a fly was going to land on Pence's head and bring some levity to an otherwise very painful event. We don't know what's going to happen with the election, and we have no control over it. Those are two very unpleasant conditions. But as we say all the time, what do we have control over? Our attitudes and our actions. So let's say the worst case scenario happens and he's reelected. I know I hate to say those words, but well, I'm preparing because I know I will be very, very upset. But I'm preparing and I'm giving us some tools to help us prepare, just in case. So first of all, I'm thinking if we flip the Senate, that will be awesome because he would be a very hard time getting anything enacted. That's exactly what happened to Obama. But if we have to go to the absolute worst case scenario, how can we prepare so we don't go into a very, very deep depression for a very long time? Well, we remember our ability to create some space and frame things in a different context. Create some space so our emotions and our reactions don't have to be absolutely sealed together. We can create that space to look at our emotions and determine how we wish to react. That's what this practice is all about. And yes, there is a lot to be afraid of, but it also helps to remember, when we're putting it into context, that we have been through bad times before. Remember in the 60s, the Vietnam War, remember Nixon, remember 9/11. We've survived these things. We have more resilience than we think. It just seems worse right now because we're in the middle of it. So let's give ourselves that breath and that space of remembering that we have survived things just as bad, if not worse, than these. And there are some benefits to this time. I bet more people are more active in their political beliefs and enforcing them, whether it's voting and protesting, than ever before. I know my daughter's generation is out there fighting in a way they never did. And also, I think we can safely say this might be the end of the 70-year-old white male dominance. A new generation will be taking over the reins, even if it's not this election. So let's frame it both from a future-based and a past-based perspective so we don't get too mired in this particular moment. Another way to move forward, I think, is to find like a mentor or someone who inspires you. So many of the people that I reference and quote in these talks are my mentors, but I have two that I wanted to mention specifically today. One is Dan Ariely, who is a professor of behavioral economics at Duke University and an author. And the other is an Australian rock musician named Nick Cave, who's quite famous in the 80s and the 90s. So let me tell you about Dan Ariely first. As I said, he's an author. He wrote a book called Predictably Irrational, which is wonderful, and I highly recommend it. But I'll tell you his story. When he was 17, he was at a celebration. He was graduating from some part of his education in Israel at the time. And at that celebration, they set off fireworks. And he actually was standing next to a firework that seemed to have been more powerful than anybody knew. And no one knows exactly what went wrong, but he was burned over 70% of his body. And he underwent many surgeries and painful treatments for years. And even today, he is permanently scarred, especially on the right side of his face. But fast forward many years, he's now a famous professor, and he gives talks all around the world. And he has also grown a beard. And because of his burns, it can actually only grow on the left side of his face. So the right side of his face is completely clean shaven, and the left side has a very dark beard on it. And it's his way of owning what's happened to him, his way of showing people, I'm okay with this. I want you to be okay with it. So he's gone to his dark side, his scary side, and been courageous and confronted it. And so he's been an inspiration for me too, because I never used to take photos of myself or put videos of myself up on social media. I just never did that. But it's absolutely critical for this new position that I'm encountering and achieving here. And so I've had to face my biggest fear, which is, putting my face up. So Dan Ariely has been a big inspiration for me. And then the other one is Nick Cave. And he was actually in a band, a very famous band in Australia in the 80s or 90s called the Bad Seeds. He's kind of the Iggy Pop of Australia. And he used to write songs that would explore like death and love and violence, just pretty far out there. But anyway, he, in 2015, he has a set of twin sons, but in 2015, one of them, Arthur, had taken some LSD and went walking on the cliffs in Brighton where they were living at the time, and actually fell off and died instantaneously. And it was just an incredibly difficult time for him and had a huge impact on him. I think he stopped playing and performing for some time. But in the meantime, he started a blog called The Red Hand Files. I actually sent one of his posts to Avon. But I'll quote from one of them from September, where he wrote, Freedom for me is the ability to relinquish control of the outcome of things. So in this respect, I agree with Nina Simone, who said, it is to be delivered from fear. So freedom is to be delivered from fear, right? We're talking about exposing and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable in there and find courage. So these are fraught times, but for me, meditation, the loss of my son, and even the fact that I am just getting older has allowed me to arrive at a place where I do not feel at the mercy or of the consequence. I do not feel at the mercy of consequence in the way that I used to. It doesn't matter to me so much these days what happens. I feel that if I stay true to myself and follow my intuitions, if I surrender control of life's outcomes, things tend to work out okay. At an artistic level, I play what I want to play and say what I want to say, and let the chips fall where they may. This is a kind of freedom. And as I have said before in the Red Hand Files, the universe has had its best shot at me, and I am still kicking around. And I think we can all take some comfort in that phrase. We are still kicking around. So I'll leave you with this wonderful quote from Maya Angelou. She says, because of the routines we follow, we often forget that life is an ongoing adventure. And the sooner we realize that, the quicker we'll be able to treat life as art, to bring all our energies to each encounter, to remain flexible enough to notice and admit when what we expected to happen did not happen. We need to remember that we are creative and can invent new scenarios as frequently as they are needed. So the whole idea of, being able to go into these dark areas, become vulnerable, allows us to have a new sense of freedom, a new sense of creativity. And when we explore that, we find the opposite. That's how we build it. We take the train to the end and thereby build the courage and resilience. And as I've said, we're already doing that. We are already courageous, but we can build on that. The more that we recognize our courageousness, the more we have it. And it can build on itself, and we can make that choice what we choose to build. So we need our opposites. Be refreshed when you think, oh, I can only have one perspective. And no, you can. You can change your view. You can change what you see, as Louise Gluck says. So thank you very much. And now we'll sit.